Hi, hello everyone. Thank you for waiting. So we are now starting with our new Fibersort Producer Network session. Today we will be focusing in the current and potential end markets for fiber sorted materials. So how can post-consumer textiles, once they're sorted, be reinserted into the production flows? So today, my name is Natalia, for those who haven't heard me before. I'm a researcher for the Fibersort project within Circular Economy. And here with me is Hilde. She's project manager for the Fibersort, also within Circular Economy. And we have joining the call today as invited guests, Cindy, who's CEO and founder of Worn Again, and Marike, and she's Circular Cities Manager for Worn Again. So welcome. Can you hear us over there on the other side of the call?
Yes.
Hi, can you hear us?
Hi.
Hi, everyone. Does that work? Can you hear us?
Yes.
Cindy and Marika here.
We can hear you perfectly. Thank you very much for joining.
We lost the sound
in the background, but now we can hear you correctly. Thank you for joining, and we will be talking more in depth later with you. But right now, we wanted to share a short overview of the updates of the Fibersort project, what is new, what is upcoming, and for that, here Hilde will guide you through it.
Yes, thank you very much, Natalia. For those who haven't heard me before, I'm Hilde van Duin. I'm the project manager for the Fibersort project. So maybe just to clarify, when we talk about the Fibersort project, we mean the Interact Northwest Europe project that is called Fibersort. And the aim of this project is to commercialize the Fibersort technology, which is an automated sorting technology. Here you can see the different partners that we have in the project. Circular Economy is a lead partner, and both Natalia and myself work for Circular Economy. Smart Fiber Sorting is a big sorter in the north of the Netherlands. That's actually where the first fiber sorter is now installed. We have Reshare, a major collector of used textiles, Preprocessing, a mechanical recycler, Valvan, the developer of the technology, and Worn Again, who will introduce themselves, I think, more extensively later on in the call. Can skip this one, right?
Yeah, so basically just some updates first, then we will have a deep dive interview with Cindy and Marike from Worn Again, and then we will have some open discussion and time for questions. So also, if you come up with questions during the presentations, I would ask you to either write them in the group chat or save them for later, and then we can have a discussion around them.
Yes, and my role here is just to give you a very brief update for those that are not familiar with the Fibersort yet. So here you see a visual representation of the current chain, you could say, for used textiles, where used textiles, hopefully are being collected. The collected textiles then are being separated into the rewearable ones and the non-rewearable ones. And here I always like to specify that non-rewearables doesn't imply that they're broken, but it's rather that they're non-resellable as in their original form. And currently, these non-rewearables can be downcycled, incinerated, or landfilled. And of course, we are all looking for ways to bring those materials back into the textiles loop. And that's where the Fibersort is a potential technology that could close the textiles loop. So a part of the non-rewearable materials that are monomaterials, so they only consist of one layer, one kind of fabric. Those can be sorted based on their composition and color, and could then be very valuable feedstock for recyclers like Worn Again and Preprocessing, who are also part of our research project. So this is where we are today. The Fibersort is operational. It's at the facilities of Smart Fiber Sorting in the north of the Netherlands. We are now installing the automated sorting equipment, so actually it can run 24/7, and it could do up to 1 garment every second. As I mentioned before, so we sort monomaterials up to 2 different fiber types, and we are able to sort them based on their composition, so both pure materials as well as blends, but also color sorting. And we are going to add knitted versus a woven scanner, but that will be a little bit further along the line. And for us, really with the Fibersort project, so the technology is working quite well, but our main struggle now is to really secure the market for all these fiber-sorted materials. You can imagine that we're already able to sell, for instance, some pure wool and some pure cotton, but for all the other materials, we're still looking at the market, so potential for uptake. And of course here, Worn Again, I think, and that will be illustrated in this call, there's a huge potential if they could take up the cotton polyester blends, for instance. We did some testing on the accuracy of the Fibersort, so meaning that we fiber sorted fractions, and then we tested these different fractions in a lab, and it actually showed that the Fibersort is very accurate, both on pure materials as well as blends. If you're interested to learn more, you can find our fact sheet on the Fibersort Northwest Europe, Interact Northwest Europe page, and you can find the accuracy results for all different fractions. And of course, and I already mentioned it, end markets will be crucial to make this technology also financially viable and to live up to its potential. And what we do see is that there are developments in the market that are quite hopeful, so that there are many different initiatives out there to develop recycling technologies for different fractions, some of them being mature technologies, some of them being upcoming. Within 2 weeks, I think approximately, we will publish a bigger overview of all the different technologies that are out there, both existing as in development, that form together the potential end market for fiber-sorted materials. And what else can you expect from us? We recently launched, for those who follow our project, so who are subscribed to our mailings, they received a draft policy recommendations document. We very much welcome any input on those. We're also going to publish our findings on the end markets. We will illustrate the potential of the Fibersort with a case study report. And mark in your agendas, March 12th, we have our final event in the Netherlands.
So thank you, Hilde, very much for all of those updates, very comprehensive. And now we would like to welcome Cindy from Worn Again, who founded Worn Again with a vision to fight textile waste and to enable circularity of raw materials for clothing and textiles through a polymer recycling technology. So welcome, Cindy. Maybe you can introduce yourself as well.
Hi everyone. Good to have you on the webinar today. Cindy Rhodes, I've seen who's on the list, and I think there are a few familiar faces here. Yeah, so I set up Worn Again back in 2005 with a vision to eradicate textile waste, and we've gone through different iterations in the business up until 2012, when we started to realize the kind of ultimate solution for recycling textiles needs to take place at the molecular level, which is when we started the technology development, which I'm going to introduce a few slides first, and then I believe Natalia and I are going to get into a couple of questions. So if you're happy to start, perhaps we can go to the first slide, Hilda.
Of course.
Fabulous, great. So yeah, maybe on to the next one here. Good. So you'll all be familiar with the issues here and the challenges, and it's a good starting point to look at the resources and the problem. I won't go through each of these, but we all know that the high volume of raw materials and natural resources that go into textiles is growing rapidly. The projections by 2030 are that we're going to increase by 63% in our use of polyester and cotton as raw materials. And At the same time, the big mountains of end-of-use textiles, post-consumer, are going to landfill, and increasingly we need some solutions around this, especially given the fact that today less than 1% are going of end-of-use textiles go back into new textiles. If you could go to the next slide, please. Here are some of the problems quite well known around the industry now with the challenges to do with textile-to-textile recycling or mechanical methods for recycling. We're unable to separate the dyes and the other contaminants in recycling. So what's being done today means we have to reuse the same dyes that are already in the textiles, which can sometimes affect quality issues and also has cost implications of the next life products. We also know that the mechanical methods are unable to separate blended polyester and cotton once they have come together in textiles. If we go to the next slide. So when we started looking at a solution at the molecular level for recycling, we asked ourselves, you know, kind of, what's our starting point? If the problem of end-of-use textiles is big, what is it we're trying to solve? And so we looked at what the key fibers were, what's in our end-of-use textiles, and we recognized that over 80% are made up of polyester and or cotton. So if we wanted to devise or design a solution that could deal with the global problem of textile waste, we had to be able to deal with both polyester and cotton in a solution. Cue next slide, where we have a solution. Many of you will be aware of the technology we've been developing since 2012, where we have designed a process based on solvent chemistry, which is able to take in polyester, cotton, both pure and blended polyester and cotton, with up to 20% other. So we don't need pure cotton to go into our process or pure PET. We can have spandex, nylon, wool, all sorts of other what we call contaminants that can go in at the beginning. We're also able to take in PET bottles, it's polyester, so that can go into the process as well. It goes through a number of different steps. First, on the polyester front, where we are able to separate the dyes and other contaminants to be able to produce an end polyester pellet, which is equivalent in chemical structure, quality as you would get with virgin derived PET made from oil. So it's a polyester pellet as an output. And then on the cotton front, what we're able to do is dissolve this cellulose, recapture the cellulose, separate out all the other contaminants to produce a cellulosic pulp. So the equivalent of a dissolving wood pulp that can then be spun into a viscose-like fiber. And so very much at the beginning of the design of this process, from day one when we were looking at the chemistry, but certainly with the long-term view of moving into the chemical engineering and looking at an industrial process, we had three very specific targets and goals. And the first was that we needed to produce for our outputs, to produce virgin equivalent outputs. So the quality had to match, and that so that the industry would not have to compromise on that front. The second was that the process itself had to be environmentally friendly. Otherwise, what's the point of creating a new process? It really is top of the agenda for the process itself to be environmentally friendly. And then thirdly, and definitely most important to a lot of companies, is that these outputs that will be coming from our future plants need to be able to compete in price with their virgin comparable outputs. We've always intended for this technology to overtake the use of virgin resources, and the only way we can do that is by competing on price. Then if we go to the next slide here, this shows just an overview of where our technology sits within the overall circular supply chain or loop. You can see the blue box there is our process, where we have our outputs going back into the supply chain to be spun into fiber, fabric. You can see there at the brand and retailer front, we have a collection of brands that we work with, and those brands are growing. Companies like H&M and Kering have been involved very early on. And then more recently, we brought in ASICS, Himes, DirectText, Ibella, a couple of other companies, some along the supply chain, but all very much at the forefront of wanting to bring in a circular future. So, we very much see this type of development as, 100% needing to collaborate with the industry on many fronts, so that we're designing a technology that's fit for purpose, that the industry wants to buy into. So we've got the brands there, and then once those products go off to consumers and hopefully are collected, today's collection rates are maybe not as good as they could be, but I guess in some ways, and we'll probably get into this during our discussion, in today's market, I mean, there really is no incentive to increase collection volumes. Downcycling markets are oversaturated, reuse as well. There's limited routes for them. So we hope with new technologies like ours that's going to transform that whole side of the industry. We also see, and this is where Fibersort comes in, is that once end of use or post-consumer textiles are collected, the way the industry is set up today, it's set up on a model of reuse and rewearables because that's where the value is. But we really see this side of the industry shifting. As soon as we stick up a plant of 50,000 tons capacity per year, we're going to be needing a heck of a lot more end-of-use textiles to be collected and to feed the beast, is what we usually refer to. And so we see a lot of transformation and a lot of opportunity in this side of the supply chain. And, definitely a new model for sorting, which makes sorting simpler and economically viable to do closer to the source of collection. Rather than sending off to Poland or India to be sorted, we see a world where we need a very simple sorting process happening closer to home, pull out some of the rewearables, then everything else goes through a Fibersort, which is 100% automated. And for sure, we need this type of technology to bring down the cost and to sort end-of-use textiles for chemical recycling processes in a way that makes economic sense. And so those garments, those non-rewearables, will go through a Fibersort-like process and then off to our future processing plants, where we will have a couple of further processing steps where the materials will get cut, clipped, and all of your metals, zippers, buttons removed, and then go through a pre-treatment step, then into our process. And it just goes straight back in all over again. So there's a lot of innovation to happen on this side, and it's really exciting to be part of Fibersort because this work started many years ago, and there's a lot of innovation that's required there. Continued innovation as recycling technologies like ours get closer to commercialization and industrialization. If we go to the next slide here, this is, very much part of our commercial development over the last 5 to 8 years. We focused a lot on what this whole post-consumer textile world is going to look like. What are we going to need for our process? And here you see a breakdown of what is found in an average ton of PostConsumer Textiles. And this is based on a sorting trial that we did with Fibersort in 2017. I think that these are estimates. Well, some of it's based on the trial, but I think numbers tend to vary. But on average, this is what we found, that of the textiles that are collected, about half are going for reuse, half are non-rewearable and can't be reused. Again, they're going for downcycling. And through the Fibersort trial, we found that the numbers here represent, you know, what's found. Quite a high volume of pure cotton, about 49%. Pure polyester was really surprising because there's so much polyester in end-of-use textiles, but we only found 6% pure polyester. So we wonder, where the heck is it all going? It may be going for other applications, but definitely a high proportion of it is caught up in the blends here, in the 33%. So for us, this really works out nicely because, you know, a good 75 to 85% of what's going for downcycling is suitable for the worn again process. Then going to the next slide, the how, I think Hilda covered this earlier, but we again see a huge value in Fibersort being able to create a highly mechanized process for sorting that gets us our feedstock in high volumes at a low cost manner. And then to the next slide, big picture here, we really see coming soon, hopefully sooner. We see this, the ability to go from 1% textile to textile recycling to 80%. It's going to take time. There's a long roadmap to get there, but really that's our big end game, and we think it's truly possible in the coming decade or so. And then finally, we've ended up on a lovely, colorful slide from the Fibersort team, Circle Economy, on which we can then move into some of the questions.
Sure. Thank you very much, Cindy, for the presentation and the introduction to your technology. And you mentioned that already that the Fibersort for you also presents a simpler and economically viable way of sorting. And also we have seen it already accurate and reliable to get a specific fraction of material composition. So I was wondering, what type of barriers still need to be addressed in your perspective to ensure the successful implementation of this technology and ultimately getting to that 80% that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I think less barriers and more just part of the roadmap of what we need to be doing. I mean, in many ways, I think Fibersort is really ahead of its time because the market, I think, will really, once we get these huge capacity plants up and running, we will need, you know, the entire infrastructure and supply chain and Fibersort-like technologies there to deliver these high volumes. And I think it's a bit chicken and egg because the market maybe isn't quite ready for Fibersort, but once we do have these plants up and running, we will need this, you know, far and wide. I think there's a space for development between now and when we and other chemical recycling technologies have plants up and running. There's a market for the mechanical recycling technologies and processes. So it's a good testing ground to really fine tune and optimize what Fibersort's able to do. But yeah, I mean, it's tricky because there is a window, you know, between now and when chemical recycling is really going to be able to provide that high volume solution. So I think it's going to require a bit of patience in the market and patience to, you know, communications to brands, communications to consumers, because the big message we want to get out there to people is, you know, recycle your textiles, don't throw them in the bin. The challenge is, if we start collecting higher volumes between now and when chemical recycling is available at high capacity, what are we going to do with all these textiles? I think that's one of the barriers to do with, you know, collection, really improving our infrastructure, but the communications around, you know, how we communicate to brands and consumers what's coming, and the fact that it's not going to happen overnight.
Definitely, and as you said it's a roadmap to where we're going, and it will take time. And I was wondering, you were talking about the market and your perspective as a chemical recycler, and the perspective from mechanical recyclers as well. And I was wondering, in your perspective, where does policy sit in this conversation, and what can be done so far to really increase the market uptake and really set the ground to make the market ready for this new recycled textiles that will be upcoming?
Yeah. No, I think that's a really important one. And I know within Fibersort, we've been doing work around policy shift and change and what we need to happen, because with any kind of huge industrial shift, we need government to be involved. And it's complicated because textiles go beyond national boundaries, and, you know, we're going to need a lot of change at local level, at national level, at international level. And so, you know, we're starting to see hotspots of regions where government is definitely starting to implement change. You know, France with Eco-TLC, we see a lot happening in Holland, and in the EU, where they're banning textiles from landfill, which is great. There's a lot of activity happening. Again, it's that challenge of, well, what happens if we start collecting more? What are we going to do with it today? So that's a bit of a challenge. But also from the brand perspective, you know, we want to see governments rewarding brands for increasing the uptake of recycled content. Now, today, at the moment, it may be that it's mechanically recycled content. It may be rPET from plastic bottles. Sometimes this will come with a cost premium. Sometimes there can be a challenge or a compromise with quality. But there's so much innovation happening now that I think, you know, there's no excuse for brands not to be really innovating and using more of these recycled possibilities, and having government as well, you know, creating tax incentives or tax breaks for brands that are increasing their recycled content. There's just so many different levels to attack this, from the product and production perspective, all the way around to, you know, what happens when textiles reach end of life and what can be done there.
Definitely, and as you mentioned, it's a multi-layered action that is required, and as Hilde mentioned before, and you did as well, we have been working on recommendations for policymakers within the Fibersort consortium, and if all of you then read through our first recommendations draft, you will find that there are actions proposed at different levels, so looking at local governments, but also at a regional level, at a European level. So basically, I see there are many questions already popping up here in the chat, so maybe Cindy, we can start tackling some of those as well, so that everyone has the time to participate. I will keep this beautiful slide instead of having a discussion slide, because I think it's much nicer, and it really illustrates the work we are undertaking. So thank you for sharing that slide with us. So I think the first, we have a question on, you mentioned that where Worn Again was sitting within the whole value chain, and there was a pre-processing step. And here Marissa is asking what kind of pre-processing is required.
Can I ask who was asking the question there?
Yeah, so Marissa Adler, can you maybe unmute yourself and elaborate a bit further?
Give us an intro, Marissa. Where are you from?
Yeah, can you hear me now? There we go. My name is Marissa Adler. I'm from Resource Recycling Systems in the US. And I'm just curious about, we're doing a lot of work on chemical recycling technologies on the plastics side and on the textile side. And so I'm curious what kind of pre-processing is required and what kind of pre-treatment. And then if it's okay, that part two of that question is on the price. When you say price parity with virgin equivalent, do you mean price parity with virgin or parity with other virgin equivalent, virgin quality outputs from other recycling technologies, other chemical recycling technologies?
Good questions, plural. So firstly, to answer the pre-processing steps, well, there are a number of pre-processing steps that are required that gets the feedstock into the sort of morphology that we need that's most efficient to go into our process. And we are currently doing some innovation and development work around this. So I can't give you too much detail, but what I can say is that, you know, what we're trying to do and aiming to achieve is develop a specification that we can then give to the post-consumer collection industry, to waste management companies, to collectors at a city level that can then provide us not just with the fiber breakdown specification, but also the morphology so that it's cut into the size that we need. It's got the metal removed, that sort of thing. And we are still in a phase where we're not quite sure how much of that will be happening with our plant operators and how much can happen in the industry, whether we have a a preferred partner for each plant that is the key processor, but that's all being worked out at the moment. And I think our general approach to it is, if there are people out there that also want to answer this question and want to get involved, we're very keen to collaborate, because it's a huge re-engineering of the post-consumer collection and sorting supply chain, because it's not set up to deliver for chemical recycling today. So happy to take the conversation offline and hear more about what you're doing and what you're looking into on that front. I hope that answers your question. Marissa? She's on mute. And then the point was around price parity. So that's a really interesting one. I mean, when we started out, the thinking was that, look, we're going to have an output that, if our goal is to overtake the use of virgin resources, i.e. PET pellets that get spun into yarn, PET virgin equivalent or virgin, and cellulose, comparable to dissolving wood pulp, that we somehow need to be able to match that market price, be able to follow it, either just below or at the same price, because otherwise it's, we know through our brand partnerships and through market history that even if there is a tiny premium, brands are not interested in paying that premium. However, I mean, there's a lot of interesting developments now in the past year or so. A couple of years ago, we saw with things like rPET that there was a reticence to purchase it at a premium. Today, rPET, I believe, is going for something around $2,000 per ton, and virgin PET is around $900 per ton. So whether we're competing with our pet, whether we're competing with virgin pet, it's what the market will pay. But I think the important thing to say is that from a brand perspective, and what our USP has always been, is that we're not creating this product or this output to be a premium product with a sustainability tax that prevents, where brands have to make a choice between, the right option or the cheaper option. We want this to be the option that they will choose because it will enable them to achieve their circularity goals. So it's a bit of an evolving discussion, that one, but I think important to say that our target for this is to not create a premium product. It'll be down to what the market will pay, and perhaps in the first couple of years it will be more expensive and we'll be competing with our pet. But then, as the industry starts to balance out, it comes down in price, and as long as it's the preferred choice to virgin resources, that's what we'll be fighting for and pushing for.
Thank you very much, Cindy. Marissa, anything else to add?
Oh, thank you. No, that was terrific. Thanks. I really appreciate that.
Perfect. So we also had 2 questions from Alan. Would you like to take up your questions, Alan? I think they could spur some interesting discussion on waste share.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Hi. The first one was, as Cindy's still on the line, I'll direct it at her. Cindy, you mentioned that if you get the 50,000 ton a year plant up, I think the term you used was that we will need to feed the beast. And I'm slightly playing devil's advocate here because I wish you every success and it needs to happen. But I just wondered how you think we could square the message, or rather the fact that we would be needing to collect more clothing to go for recycling, whilst at the same time we have to promote the waste hierarchy, which clearly puts reuse over recycling. And I feel that if we start collecting more and more clothing, the percentage-wise at least, the recycling element by percentage will be high, will increase, and the reuse rate will decrease.
Yeah. No, I knew you were going to throw me a tough one, Alan. No, it's something we talk about and internally quite a lot. I mean, the way we look at it is, if you take the Netherlands, for example, the country's generating about 300,000 tons of post-consumer textiles every year. They're only collecting 100,000 tons, and maybe even lower. And I mean, all we're proposing here is that we start diverting everything that's going to landfill into processes like ours so we can recapture those resources. Now, if there is a way to, increase the reuse content, or the reuse markets, which I think is going to happen naturally, in some ways, I think it's going to move into a space where, the whole quality issue, the fact that quality has gone down, I think we're going to see it, start shifting to where brands are incentivized to make higher quality products that last longer, that can go through reuse loops and, innovative business models where they can continue making money through those second and third reuse loops. I mean, that's a totally future thinking, idea in the world, but I think that's going to happen. From our perspective, whether people are consuming more or not, there is still a massive, massive problem of huge volumes of resources being thrown away. All we want to do is divert the ones that can't be reused. If they can be reused, that is our number one priority, definitely, with the waste hierarchy, and we would absolutely encourage that. But we know that there's still even a lot of reuse going straight to landfill after it's collected due to whatever reason. So it's I think the cultural issues around a different type of clothing production, increasing quality, reuse models, innovative new ways of reuse is going to happen anyway. All we're doing is catching the kind of tail end of it when those resources are ready to, it's better they come into a process like ours and spun back into fiber rather than going into, landfill or incineration. So the volume thing is, we'll grow our plants according to what's needed. 50,000 is just a estimate. It could be 30,000, it could be 100,000. If we're collecting that much volume that has no reuse value, we'll put it straight into a plant and capture the resources.
Thank you there, Cindy. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. Shall I go on to my second question then?
For sure.
Yeah, I think, I think this is Natalia that kind of mentioned it, that one of the things that circular economy have identified is the need to establish new markets. And I think all three of you who've spoken so far have kind of touched, but the question was, do you think that if, for example, the European Union, but this could apply to any government, were to instigate eco-design standards that basically encourage or coerce, not quite sure, manufacturers to use minimum recycled content by a year in the future, be it 5 years time, be it 10 years time, would that help? Do you think that would help? That's the question. So that's really kind of to all three of you that have spoken so far.
I think it's a good conclusion you kind of integrated there. As I said, and Hilde also mentioned, that of these policy recommendations that we have built, implementing decide guidelines, but also the use of standards for recycled content is one of the recommendations we are making at European level, but also including the potential of recycled content to be increased by green public procurement. So definitely we look forward to you looking deeper into these policy recommendations and also sharing any feedback you may have on it.
Thank you. Anyone else got anything else to say?
I would just, I think legislation for sure is always going to be helpful to shift business activities with incentives and getting the right policies in place. I think there is a challenge around recycled content today and it hitting the quality and the price point that we need it at. So I think that's a bit of a challenge, but certainly in the coming 3 to 5 years, when chemical recycling can deliver what we're all hoping it will, ultimately it's going to be down to the economics. And if we can create those outputs where there is no choice in price and definitely no compromise in quality, then, it's in the name, circular economics. It will make sense to shift all production, not just 10%, not just, it's great if we have 20% recycled content in a garment. It's going to be made easy for 100%. But certainly if we're trying to shift an entire industry, it's going to take a good decade or so, because the insane volumes of fiber being used, we can build plants as quickly as we like, but it's going to take us and other innovators a while to be able to catch up to be able to satisfy that global demand. But I mean, the good news is we do have enough textiles, PET bottles. We have enough resources already in circulation today and in our closets to satisfy our annual demand for these new raw materials. It's just the system isn't set up to A, collect and capture them, and B, turn them back into usable resources.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And also, I can see some questions from Anna Persson. Would you like to unmute yourself and maybe pose those questions to Cindy? Hi, Anna. Can you hear us?
Hello, this is Anna from TechSaid. I think there's two Anna persons on the call because this didn't came from me actually.
Hi, Anna from TechSaid.
Hello, but very interesting to hear your discussions. I think when legislations will be a big impact on the industry in this means, and how these incentives then are being made will make a big impact on the scalability of the different recycling opportunity, and as well of the collection and sorting, of course.
Yeah. Well, and also a question for Alan Wheeler. I mean, you were very involved in the UK.
You've woken me up again.
Yes. Tell us about that. I mean, how are we to expect change if we can't even get our own government to implement a very simple policy?
Sorry, what was the first part of the question?
Well, the recent proposal for legislation in the UK, the Parliament, for putting a small tax, an eco-TLC that they rejected.
Well, it depends on. I would say we're kind of going into internal politics here. The EAC obviously took the view that the government rejected all their recommendations, but Defra don't hold that view. They haven't said they've rejected everything. So they've basically just referred back to what came out of the waste strategy that was published last year, which was that by 2025, I think it was, that they will review the possibility of introducing an extended producer responsibility on a range of products. They identified 5 material streams, of which one of those was textiles, and Defra also have committed to completing 2 of those reviews by 2022, which was one of the recommendations that the Environmental Audit Committee made. So basically, Defra, that's the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs for you that are not in the UK. They haven't said they're not going to do it, but if they're not going to do it by 2022, they have promised to do it by 2025. And there's definitely a sense that it will happen, or the review will happen, and that there will be a serious look at it. But whether it will be in the time frame that the Environmental Audit Committee demand or want, that I have to say very, very much remains to be seen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if they implemented it today and started making some money off an EPR, they'd have enough money to build themselves a Worn Again plant in the UK, and then they'd have.
That's very true.
Not just a solution for end-of-use textiles, but also a new business, adding to economic growth and all that great stuff. So, yeah.
I mean, more or less what Defra have said is that they're currently reviewing this, again, internal UK politics. They are reviewing the packaging regulations and the extended producer responsibility scheme that's in place there, and what they learn from that experience could well inform textiles and the other material streams that they are looking at. So I would say keep a close eye on what's happening with plastics.
Yeah, that's good. That's positive to hear. It's not shut down.
No, it's not. But it's like I think they feel that there's a resources issue for Defra, and that's why they can't commit until 2022. But we've still got to keep pushing the agenda.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alan, and I'm sure this discussion will keep going, and very interesting insights. We have a few more questions, and now we've solved the Anna dilemma. So first of all, Anna, thank you for sharing all of your this link throughout your network as well. So the question was coming from Mario. So Mario, from Circular Fashion, could you unmute yourself and tell us a bit more about what your questions were about?
Yeah, hi, sorry Anna, I didn't know that I'm here with your name. So my question was to Cindy, would it help you if you know what dye stuff or chemicals are in the textiles, so that you know what chemicals you have to apply to remove them? So for example, do you handle reactive dye different from other dyes, or do you handle like other chemicals from finishings like waterproof finishes, flame retardants, and so on? Do you handle them differently than others, and would it help you if you know they are in?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a good one on the tech side of things. I think, you know, when we started out, and the approach that we took with this technology, which is very much driven by our chief scientific officer, who's called Dr. Adam Walker, he's the brains behind this technology and the chemistry and the approach that we've taken. And because of this approach, where we're using solvents, one for the polyester and one for the cotton to take out the cellulose, it's a process that's very selective, where you're able to identify a polymer that you're after, that you want to recapture, and dissolve it and leave everything else behind. So the actual technology itself is based on being able to just capture that one polymer, either the cellulose or the polyester, where we can effectively remove everything else. So I you know, that was our starting point for it. I think and also, we never expected 8 years ago for the industry to get to a point where it would be saying, ooh, could we design things differently? Could we do things differently for recycling? We just assumed the world was going to carry on as it was. So we kind of, the whole purpose of this design is that it could deal with the worst case possible, anything that's out there, all the finishes, the chemicals, anything and everything that you could find in post-consumer textiles. We needed a solution that could just cut through it. Now, could you design so it's more effectively or effective? Yeah, possibly. And certainly, you know, there's a different approach to removing the dyes from the polyester as there is with the cotton and the cellulose. Given that it's a natural fiber, it's a lot more difficult to remove the dyes. So I think there could be some innovation on that front. And of course, there could be innovation across design. But I think that the challenge will be is that if you're designing, you'd need to get the entire industry to make those changes. Because when it comes into our process, it's going to be mixed with everything else. But it's definitely a conversation that I think, you know, as we get closer to market, you know, anything that could help make the process more efficient, you know, for instance, don't use metal in zippers, use polyester trim. You know, you could start designing more for circularity to make it more efficient and to have higher yields. But we try, you know, our aim was to design something that was pretty much foolproof. But I'd love to understand where your question is coming from and what you're doing in your work. Do you think there's a need for this? Are there brands that are looking at this that you've experienced, or?
Yeah, of course. So basically, circular fashion is working exactly on this case, that we help fashion brands to use the right dye stuff, to use the right material combination, so that the product is from the beginning easy recyclable. And we also learned we're also in contact with other recyclers and chemical ones also, that they telling us, hey, these and these chemicals are disturbing our process, and it would be much more efficient and like economical viable if you could just leave this out. And we are also working together also with TexAid on solutions, how you could, for example, work with IDs that you also know more about the product and so on. So that's like, but it's like additional to the Fibersort. It's not complementary. It is complementary to Fibersort, basically.
Right. No, and I get what you're saying, and I think it's an interesting one, because you know, when you say, well, let's design for recyclability, which process are we designing for? Is it for renew cell? Is it for ward again? Is it for mechanical recycler? There's so many different variations, but it's definitely an interesting area and something to explore more. But I would suggest if we could follow up offline on this, that would be something we could introduce our, you know, I can introduce you to our tech team, and they may have a bit more detail to fill in, you know, on the work that you're doing that might help inform that whole area a bit more.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll do that. Thank you very much for the answer.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you very much. And we have run out of time already. We are just going to answer briefly on Lorraine, who is asking if Fibersort is commercially available yet. And Hilda will answer that.
So yes, is the Fibersort commercially available yet? Yes. There are different organizations currently discussing potential use of the Fibersort or purchase of the Fibersort technology with Valvan, which is our project partner, and a plant due up and running. So there is a Fibersort running in Wormerveer, north of Amsterdam. There are different other Fibersorts out in the world, but this is the, let's say, the pilot one, and the one that really operates at a little bit of a scale. And here, of course, I do want to emphasize, maybe again, that while the technology now is working, and Cindy also referred to it, we are facing a little bit of a chicken and egg situation, because now we have a technology and now we're looking for the market for these fiber-sorted technologies. So in the sense, would I recommend you to start operating a Fibersort now, as our partner in Wormerveer is doing it? You might need to rethink that a bit, because as I mentioned, we are very much still looking for the demand to purchase these fiber-sorted materials.
Thank you. Thank you, Cindy. I think you muted yourself already, but I wanted to thank you very much for joining, and also Marike, who's there on besides.
Drinking coffee.
I do exist though, guys, in case people are like.
Thank you very much both for taking the time to join this call and present your solution, your innovation, and also how you're tackling different challenges and issues that arise on the way to scaling up. And we have a few questions left. There were too many questions for the time, but anyone who wants to take questions offline, you will get a follow-up to this email, to this webinar with the recording and the slides. So you can always email me back and we can take it up from there.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your time and for taking an hour out of your day. It was a pleasure.
So thank you very much. Just as a reminder, if you want to receive all the links to the webinar calls, and if you want to receive our early report releases, you will receive these slides that have the sign up link to our mailing list. So you can do that. For the ones that are already signed up, you can review our policy recommendations report and share your feedback before October 21st. And then, of course, in the coming 2 weeks, you will hear about us again, because we will be releasing this overview of end markets for fiber-sorted materials. And yeah, next webinar in November, we look forward to having you on board. And a reminder of our final event for the closing date of the project on March 12th in the Netherlands. So I hope to see all of you there. Thank you very much for joining, and I will end the call now. Thank you.
Thank you.